In 1993, the small town of West Memphis, Arkansas, was shattered by a horrific crime. 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Bias, went missing, only to be found the next day, their bodies discovered in a muddy creek. The community was gripped by fear and grief, desperate for answers and for justice. What followed was a story that would captivate and outrage the world for decades, a story of fear, prejudice, and a justice system that seemed to fail at every turn. The police investigation quickly zeroed in on 3 local teenagers, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley Jr. They were outsiders, known for listening to heavy metal music and reading Stephen King novels. Damien, in particular, was interested in Wicca, and his nonconformity made him an easy target in a conservative Bible Belt town. In the eyes of law enforcement and a panicked public, these boys fit the profile of satanic cultists. The theory was shocking. The murders were part of a satanic ritual. This idea exploded in the media, fueled by a nationwide phenomenon known as the Satanic Panic. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, communities across America were swept up in hysteria over alleged satanic cults performing dark rituals and preying on children. With little to no evidence, this moral panic led to accusations, investigations, and, in some cases, wrongful convictions. The West Memphis Three were about to become its most infamous victims. The prosecution's case against the teenagers was built on a foundation of shaky evidence and pure speculation. There was no physical evidence linking any of them to the crime scene. No DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon. The case hinged almost entirely on the confession of Jessie Misskelley Jr., a teenager with an IQ in the low 70s, just above the threshold for intellectual disability. After nearly 12 hours of interrogation, without a parent or lawyer present, Jessie confessed. His story was inconsistent, filled with details that contradicted the known facts of the crime. He couldn't even get the time of the murders right. Later, he would recant his confession, stating that he was exhausted, confused, and pressured by police who promised he could go home if he just told them what they wanted to hear. But it was too late. His coerced confession became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, implicating himself, Damien, and Jason. The trials that followed were a spectacle of prejudice. The prosecution painted Damien Echols as the ringleader of a satanic coven. His black clothing, his taste in music, and the books he read were presented as proof of his guilt. A so-called cult expert testified that the nature of the boys' injuries was consistent with a satanic sacrifice, a claim that was later debunked by forensic experts. The jury was swayed not by facts, but by fear and a narrative that seemed torn from a horror movie. The verdict was devastating. Jessie Misskelley and Jason Baldwin were sentenced to life in prison. Damien Echols, branded the evil mastermind, was sentenced to death. They were just teenagers, their lives stolen by a system that seemed more interested in finding a scapegoat than finding the truth. The world watched in horror as 3 young men, whom many believed were innocent, were sent to prison for a crime they didn't commit. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a long and arduous fight for freedom. Almost immediately, doubts about the convictions began to surface. Journalists, filmmakers, and celebrities took up their cause, shining a national spotlight on the case. The 1996 HBO documentary Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, was a turning point. It meticulously laid out the flaws in the investigation and the trial, presenting the West Memphis Three not as monsters, but as victims of a modern-day witch hunt. The documentary sparked a global movement. Supporters from all walks of life, from punk rockers to legal scholars, rallied to support the Free the West Memphis 3-foot campaign. They raised money for legal appeals, scrutinized every piece of evidence, and relentlessly pushed for a new trial. Their efforts kept the case in the public eye, refusing to let the world forget about Damien, Jason, and Jessie. As the years passed, new evidence emerged that further dismantled the prosecution's case. Most significantly, advancements in DNA technology allowed for testing of evidence found at the crime scene. In 2007, DNA tests were performed on hairs and other materials. None of the DNA matched Damien, Jason, or Jessie. Instead, a hair found in one of the ligatures used to bind the victims was found to be consistent with Terry Hobbs, the stepfather of one of the murdered boys, Stevie Branch. Another hair was consistent with one of Hobbs' friends. This was a bombshell. Terry Hobbs had an alibi for the time of the murders, but questions lingered. His ex-wife, Pamela Hobbs, later claimed that he had a history of violence. Supporters of the West Memphis Three pointed to Hobbs as a far more likely suspect, someone who was overlooked by the police in their rush to pin the crime on the town's teenage outcasts. Despite this new evidence, legal hurdles and a resistant justice system made progress slow. For 18 years, the West Memphis Three languished in prison, maintaining their innocence. Damien Echols spent half his life on death row, facing execution for a crime he didn't commit. Jason and Jessie grew from boys to men behind bars. Their fight for justice seemed endless, a constant battle against a system that refused to admit its mistake. Then, in 2011, came a stunning legal maneuver. Facing the prospect of a new trial where the DNA evidence would be front and center, the prosecution offered a deal, the Alford plea. An Alford plea is a strange and controversial legal tool. It allows a defendant to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution has enough evidence to secure a conviction. By accepting the plea, Damien, Jason, and Jessie would be sentenced to the 18 years they had already served and be released immediately. It was an impossible choice. To be free, they had to plead guilty to a crime they did not commit. If they refused and went to a new trial, they risked being convicted again by a local jury and sent back to prison. For Damien, that meant returning to death row. After agonizing deliberation, they accepted the deal. On August 19, 2011, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley Jr. walked out of prison as free men. But their freedom came at a price. They were officially convicted murderers in the eyes of the law, and the real killer or killers of Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Bias have never been brought to justice. The story of the West Memphis Three is a powerful and disturbing cautionary tale. It shows how easily fear and prejudice can corrupt justice, how a community's panic can lead to the persecution of the innocent. It highlights the fallibility of the legal system, where coerced confessions and junk science can lead to wrongful convictions. Today, the case remains a raw and open wound. Damien Echols has written books and become an advocate for criminal justice reform, using his harrowing experience to fight for others who have been wrongfully convicted. Jason Baldwin has tried to build a quiet life, forever marked by the years stolen from him. Jessie Misskelley continues to struggle with the trauma of his ordeal. The fight is not over. They continue to work to fully exonerate their names, to have their convictions overturned and be officially declared innocent. They are fighting not just for themselves, but for the memory of the three little boys whose tragic deaths started it all. The truth of what really happened in Robin Hood Hills back in 1993 remains buried, and the quest for true justice continues. The West Memphis Three case forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our society and our justice system. How many others are sitting in prison because they didn't fit in? How often does fear triumph over facts in a courtroom? And what does justice truly mean when the innocent are punished and the guilty may still walk free? Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like, subscribe, and share to help keep the conversation going.